is leading on a ceremony to mark 40 years of diplomatic relations between China and Japan being postponed because of the continuing dispute between the two countries over a chain of islands.
Gulf News reports on the Eurozone crisis, with French Prime Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault saying Greece should be given more time to meet its austerity targets.
Russian energy giant Gazprom Neft has delayed the start of Arctic drilling in an oil field in the Pechora Sea because of safety concerns. This is according to the Moscow Times.
The International Herald Tribune is leading on its own investigation into computer data centres which process information such as credit card requests, video files, email, etc. Now, the paper's saying some data centres can waste up to 90% of the electricity they use because they're left switched on day and night.
And The Guardian reports that Bill Clinton has hinted that his wife Hillary may run for the presidency in 2016.
And finally, the author JK Rowling has come under fire from the town where she grew up as she publishes her first book for adults about a pretentious middle-class community. The Daily Telegraph reports residents are angry at suggestions Rowling drew on her own upbringing to write the novel. How dare she?
How dare she use her own experiences? Let's get more. Sally and I are joined by Bundeep Singh Rangar, chair of IndusView. Good to have you with us, Bundeep.
Good to be back.
It's interesting that the signal that Beijing is sending with these anniversary celebrations postponed, because it's getting very tough, and it doesn't seem as if China and Japan are coming to any resolution here over this chain of islands.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because you've got China and is now Japan's biggest trading partners. On the one hand, the economic interdependency is increasing, yet this kind of saber rattling over geographic disputes and territorial disputes is not ebbing away. And in some ways this is a bit of a litmus test, because if you look at China's other neighboring disputes with Korea, with Taiwan, there's obviously a little bit of a sense of, if this goes out of hand, how will Asia in itself contain other conflicts, Taiwan being the most pertinent in that case.
It's difficult to see, though, how this will end, isn't it? Because neither side is budging at the moment, and the actual islands themselves are home to some very important resources, aren't they?
Yeah, and the irony of it is that Japan apparently purchased these islands, a private transaction, before the mayor of Tokyo picked it up, who's known to be more belligerently anti-Chinese. So this is in some ways something that they did to prevent exactly the same situation they're facing. And it is, for whatever it's worth, a strategically important island. But I think one that'll... You remember 2 years ago they had a fishing dispute when one of the skippers was arrested by Japan. Well, what happened? China then prevented the sale of rare earth metals, which are important for Japan's electronics industry, for a period of time. So I think it'll basically be a little bit of a saber rattling, and then after some time they'll cool down. But each time it just builds more and more distrust, which is the worrying part of it.
Let's talk about something I know you're covering on the Eurozone. We can't get away. Interesting that the French Prime Minister is on side, I suppose, for Greece.
So I guess we don't have that. In the past we've talked about the more cozy alliance. Well, now it isn't so cozy anymore, and there ain't no more Hollande alliance. I guess in many ways the French Prime Minister is erring more on the side of Greece and saying, look, you can't push German-style austerity in the absence of growth and increasing both exports and domestic consumption in Europe. So they're saying, you know, what they've already agreed to about 9.5 out of the 12 billion worth of cuts that Greece is proposing. That's internally agreed. Give Greece some more time. They're on the right path. Let's not ramrod this right now. Time will be an important part of getting the formula correct.
The timing, though, of what he had to say, it was appearing in the French press yesterday, is quite interesting as well, isn't it? Because as my previous guest was saying, in Germany, the deadlock on this seems to be diluted a little bit. In Germany, they are seemingly moving on their original stance, which was, we will not give you any more time, when Antonis Samaras was new prime minister. That was very much their stance, but that seems to be shifting a bit.
It is.
As things do in Europe.
As do. And this is, how many times have we been on the show talking about this continuous crisis, and I think this is one where you're not going to find a magic bullet solution overnight. Greece is taking the right steps. The alternative, of course, is for Greece to leave the euro, which Germany clearly doesn't want.
And that's what the French Prime Minister said is the worst case scenario, and the one that has to be avoided. Correct.
And the price is a little bit more delay and a little toning down on the spending cuts and increasing growth prospects. Well, that's the right formula.
You know, we'll carry on talking about Europe forever, can't we? But let's talk about
I'm sure the viewers will be pleased that we don't.
Yeah, I think they will be.
For your sake.
Let's move on. This surprised me. Drilling in the Arctic. Now, I know Gazprom's been trying for a very, very long time to sort this out, but it will be the first company to ever do such a thing.
Which is, Russia is the biggest oil producer, not necessarily the biggest exporter, but certainly one of the biggest producers in the world. And the strategic reserves in the Arctic, what they've discovered, is obviously important for them to continue that in the future. It also lays a stake in one part of the world that is fairly open for territorial claims, and that's where some of the reason for Gazprom to move in is it's not purely to keep the oil supplies, it's all to say, look, we carve out that territory just as Canada does and the United States does and other countries have gone for, and it sets a precedent for what might happen in the Antarctic later on, because that's also currently kind of a no man's land and whoever gets there first claims it. This one is, of course, postponed because Greenpeace and other environmental groups found that the emergency procedures were just not adequate. If they had an oil spill tomorrow, they would not be able to cope with it, which would have a devastating impact. But I don't think this is something that's postponed indefinitely. It's out for a year or two. They're investing $4 to $6 billion in this project.
Yeah, I mean, they do say that they believe they'll be producing oil from that part of the Arctic in September, October next year, but they were hoping to produce it this year, so it's delayed it by a year. But from the point of view of Greenpeace and others, this is a small victory for them, isn't it? The fact that it has been delayed, the fact that the health and safety is being investigated properly.
Yeah, and there's a huge natural habitat there to be preserved, and I guess the question they'll have is, yes, you can drill, keeping aside the issues of sovereignty of a territory there, but purely making sure it's environmentally safe. Because remember what happened in Alaska some years ago, and we're still not fully out of that yet, are we?
No.
Not to mention Gulf of Mexico.
No, of course. Talking about environmentally, being environmentally friendly, perhaps, rather than safe, is the cost of these data centres. This is what the International Herald Tribune's looking at. Because even though they appear to be almost more environmentally friendly, because you're not using paper, you're not printing, you're keeping your stuff online, the amount of electricity needed for these is ridiculous. This
one really fascinates me, because if you take the internet as a whole, and from my past, internet's always been fascinating to me, and something that I follow quite actively. The internet as a whole would be the 5th largest consumer as a country of electricity. So put that in perspective, more than Russia today. We're just talking about Russia as an energy producer. So that's how much is consumed by the internet, and it's growing. In the US, for example, the equivalent of 50,000 homes is what's used by just data servers. Right? It's 2% of their consumption, is growing at north of 10% a year. So one thing is, yes, it's environmentally friendlier, less paper. On the other hand, it's incredibly power hungry, and some of it arguably can be optimized and saved.
Well, I was going to say, because a lot of this power that's being used is for backup centres if things were to go wrong, or if there were a sudden surge in traffic, that kind of thing. There must be ways of seeing, of running those centres at a lower capacity as and when traffic isn't particularly strong, or there isn't an issue with data, etc.
Yeah, there's two things here. One, when there's too much data on one side, data is managed to load balancing, and it seems like they're not doing enough load balancing for consumption of electricity. They're doing it more for storage of data. The second thing is this big move towards cloud computing, where you don't need to have your own data servers. You virtually manage that. You share data servers, and therefore you can optimize and increase the load per data server, sharing it with other companies. Now the question will be, will Facebook be willing to share its data, and can you get very rigid sort of Chinese walls between what they store and what Google stores and Yahoo stores and so on and so forth? But it's definitely a trend towards the future. And
it's a great business opportunity, isn't it, for somebody who comes up with a way of solving this problem?
Yes, and
it would be. Yeah. There's an idea for anyone. Let's skip to JK Rowling, because obviously the author of Harry Potter couldn't probably get a more popular book, I imagine, amongst children, adults, and adults alike. But it's not going down too well, her new book, because a few people are a little bit upset about it, her attitude.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of maybe, her incredible success, Britain's best-selling author, and the fact that she sold her home where she grew up, was it last year? And I think that makes it kind of like she's given up in the community, or left that hub of where she grew up, and which was potentially an inspiration for what she wrote. You could argue that she also lived there as a single mom, and that made her, maybe not the most memorable experiences, and maybe that's what made her also say, look, there's a certain middle-class pretentiousness that I also need to look at a reflecting mirror and see if that's right or not. So it kind of cuts both ways.
It does. Well, the book is called The Casual Vacancy. It's her first for adults. See how it goes down when it starts selling.
I'm sure many adults read Harry Potter, didn't they? Yeah, I know many who did.
Absolutely.
I got orders from the United States before they were released there.
Bundeep, thank you. Sally and I will see you very soon.
Bye-bye.